Ashley, welcome to Mental Health is Horrifying.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here, and I just have to say, I am completely in love with your book. We're talking about your favorite scary movie today. When your publisher was kind enough to send me an advance copy to read, I just blocked my calendar for that whole weekend. I said, nobody talk to me, nobody look at me. This is the most important book I'll ever read in my life. And it brought back so many nostalgic feelings for me about my first time watching Scream. And in the beginning of your book, you talk about your first experience watching Scream. This was the time of VHS and, of course, landlines. So I would love to hear a bit more about your first time watching Scream and how pivotal this moment in human history was.
It's interesting because it was such a part of my preteen and teen years that no any individual experience stands out in my memory. Like it's just this collective of watching this VHS in my living room over and over and over again. And no matter how many times I watched it, it never stopped being like absolutely terrifying. And just sitting there jumping when the phone would ring.
Yes.
Because this was right around the time that caller ID started to exist, but like we didn't have caller ID when this movie came out. At least I don't think we did. Um, and it was just so fun. It was a very fun and weirdly comforting way to be scared. And when you're like a teenager and an almost teenager, you're kind of like an adrenaline junkie and like you love that kind of stuff. And so this movie was the first movie I remember really being like, oh my God, I love this.
There's something about the way that they mixed humor, satire, and horror that maybe I think you and I are probably around the same age that maybe we weren't registering that consciously at the time, like, oh, this is so interesting, and that's why it's so enjoyable. But that's how we received it, that in that kind of like, oh, this is so much fun. And I think something that maybe we forget about now, we've all seen this movie so many times, the first one in 96. I think we forget how scary it was, especially that scene with Casey Becker, Drew Barrymore at the beginning. It was terrifying.
Yeah, I still to this day, every time I'm watching it, when she's like crawling away from Ghostface and her parents are right there, I'm like, throw the phone, throw the phone. Like I still yell at the TV because you watch it and you go, oh God, if like she had done the smallest things differently, like would she have been okay? And like the fact that after knowing exactly what happens, pretty much beat for beat at this point, you still react in that way. Like that's how you know the story was really well told.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get really sad watching it too. Of course, my heart just breaks for Casey Becker. And I'm so glad that in, more recent years, Drew Barrymore, I think through her talk show, she made a little skit showing that Casey Becker is alive and well today. And it felt so good to imagine an alternate universe where she escaped and everything's fine because she really sticks with you.
That opening is just unreal still.
Yes, still. Were you a fan of scary movies before Scream?
Not really, because I was pretty young. And so I had seen things that were scary because I had older cousins and I have um my mom was into like Indiana Jones and so like Temple of Doom is pretty scary, but it's not a horror movie. It gave me a complex for a very long time as a child. So Scream was definitely the first one that I like really truly loved.
Yeah, just kind of the gateway to horror for you. hmm
Yes, absolutely.
So, of course, the first Scream came out in 1996, and you talk about how this came at a time in horror when horror seemed like it was dying and it really needed to be revitalized. What do you think it was reflecting in the collective unconscious or sort of cultural zeitgeist at that moment that it was so needed?
One of the things is like the 90s were really like angsty. And so one of the things that Kevin Williamson did when he wrote Scream was he created characters who lived in the real world. They were teenagers who had seen horror movies, which hadn't been done before. You know, you see older slashers and it's a bit like, oh, like, do these, have they not figured out what's going on because of the previous, 17 movies in this franchise? Like, do they not know what's happening right now? And so Scream addressed that and made it part of the story. And I think that because of just like how angsty the 90s were, if he hadn't done that, the movie, I don't think would have worked because 90s teenagers would have been like, come on, what are we doing here? But because they saw people like themselves on screen, it felt like they were laughing with them and being scared with them instead of like laughing at them and just like waiting for somebody to trip and fall and get stabbed and then cheer because that's kind of what you did for a lot of the movies up to that point.
It was a really angsty time, and it really worked on screen with these characters who were savvy and the whole meta aspect of it. It felt like we were just waiting for something like that. And you talk in the book about it being released during the Christmas holidays so it could speak directly to those teens who were angsty and maybe wanting to escape their families and go to the movies during the break.
Yeah,
Mhm.
everybody thought that was crazy at the time, but it worked. And now you see like there are horror movies at Christmas every year. It's just become part of like the traditional theatrical calendar.
Mhm.
And but yeah, it's back then not exactly the kind of thing that you would think about watching on Christmas. Now, totally.
Now, absolutely. We can't wait to escape our families and be terrified at the theater, and we have Scream to thank for that. You, of course, talk a lot to Kevin Williamson in your book, and he talks about wanting to recapture a certain feeling when we watch our favorite horror movies and wanting to sort of like go back in time and feel that same way we did, maybe the first time we watched Scream or the first time we watched some of our other favorite scary movies. Do you think that's why Scream has such an enduring legacy, perhaps among millennials who were around to watch it for the first time in the 90s?
I do think that's a big part of it because I talked to Kevin Williamson about this. I talked to several people about this, including Eli Roth. Like there is just something about the way that you love things when you're a teenager. Like it's just different. It is like everything is life or death at that stage in your life. And so trying to find things when you're older that make you feel the same way, it's it's like competing with a first love. It's harder because there's that it's not just nostalgia. Nostalgia is definitely part of it, but it's a bit of an oversimplification. It's almost like an old friend. And that time period, I think, was so great in TV and film. Like, I feel like we got spoiled a little bit growing up with like, there was this era of culture where just everything was awesome. Like, we got Scream, we got Buffy the Vampire Slayer,
We got the
like
Spice
Dawson's
Girls.
Creek. Yeah, like it was just such a fun time in pop culture. And I do think that that sticks with you. And then as new fans are discovering the movies, because they change to incorporate the meta aspect, the social commentary, there is something that makes them feel relevant and not like they're just rewatching their mom's movies from her teenage years.
Yes, that's so true. The Scream franchise, like you say in your book, it's almost a bit prophetic in nature. It's able to predict things a little bit before they happen and really have its finger on the pulse of what's happening. I feel like Scream 6 um, in feeling is very much like that. And being set in New York City, it really, for me, encapsulates this fear of the people you see every day and not being able to trust, the person you ride the subway with or your neighbor, across the other building. It was really great, as you say, about like updating and portraying what we're afraid of.
Yeah, Mason Gooding talked quite a bit about that in the book about this domestic horror, like the scariest things being the people that you see every day that you don't know what's beneath the surface. And that was one of the things that I really liked about Scream 6 is that it took away the safety net. The idea that if you are in a room with all your best friends, you'd be okay. Or if you're in a subway car with a group of people, that you'd be okay. Or if you were in a bodega, like all of this idea that, like, as long as you get to other people, you get to safety. That wasn't true anymore. And so the fact that they went there, I thought was both crazy, but very, very smart.
Yes, it felt so different from the other Scream movies in that way. I felt that right away being in a city. And I think it was something that I hadn't even noticed about the previous movies. Oh, these all took place in sort of a more rural or suburban setting. This is the first Scream movie that's in a city, and it feels so different.
It really does. And it's like, I remember seeing it at the premiere, and they're headed, you know, to this party, right? In the opening sequence, and it's Halloween. And then later in the movie, they're at a party, and you're like, oh, it's kind of fun that it's Halloween. And then they get on the subway, and you see all these people in their costume, and you go, oh, wait, it's Halloween and people dress like Ghostface on Halloween. Oh shit. Like it was just, I remember that moment going, oh, it's not cute that it's Halloween. It's very bad that it's Halloween.
It's not cute and sort of reflects at this point in that movie and in our culture, Ghostface is so ubiquitous. And you even talk about that a bit in your book about how the mask that was chosen for Ghostface, it was just a regular typical Halloween mask that you could buy anywhere in America at the time. And it seems so simple. And when you would first look at it, you might think, why would this be scary? Why would I be so afraid of this? But what do you think makes that mask and now iconography of Ghostface so terrifying to us still?
A couple of people talked about it, but just this idea that there's like an inherent fear in the unknown. And the scariest monsters are the ones that you create in your own mind. And so the way that the opening sequence of Scream, you hear Ghostface before you see him. And the dialogue is so menacing. I want to know who I'm looking at. And the voice is so scary. He goes from being like friendly, flirty to like, I'm gonna gut you like a fish. And you're watching this and your mind, you're just, the fear is building and building, and you're not even sure what you're afraid of, but you know you're afraid. And then you see it and you're like, oh, that is the thing that I'm afraid of. And so I think that the the fact that that all happens before you ever see the image of the mask is what made that mask scary. And then the idea that the mask represents someone you know and trust betraying you while trying to murder you, it's made it so much more than it was. It's, it is still a Halloween costume. There's a photo of my husband dressed as Ghostface as a child. Uh,
It was
somewhere in
meant
our
to
house.
be.
But like the story established the fear and then showed you what fear looked like. And I think that that is why it has stuck, even though he is everywhere.
Yes, it's so true. What you said about it's the betrayal from somebody that you trust. It's your friend in high school, it's your cousin, it's your super hot boyfriend, Billy Loomis. There's a quote in your book about Ghostface from Roger L. Jackson, who, of course, is the voice of Ghostface. He says, "Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth." And I think it really speaks to that enduring quality of Ghostface and how he represents almost the deepest manifestation of our shadows, like this ability to project such darkness. And you have a beautiful chapter in your book about Wes Craven, and it's this really interesting contrast between all of these interviews for people who worked with him, talking about what an absolutely lovely person he was, just the kindest man you could ever meet, so sweet. And yet he was able to portray such darkness, such horror, not only in Scream, but he made, lots of other horror movies, even previous to Scream, that were very scary. And I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about where that darkness comes from.
He was such a fascinating person. And he didn't have the easiest childhood. His dad left him when his dad died, and he grew up with a single mom who was very religious. He wasn't allowed to watch movies, and there were elements of his life, like Freddy Krueger in Elm Street is based both on a bully, but also on a creepy man that he saw outside of his window one night who he thought was going to kill him. And so when you think about all of the experiences that you have in your life that create fear or create sadness or create tension, like all we are as people is our cumulative experiences and how we respond to them. And the thing about people like Wes Craven, people who make horror, is they channel that into art. And Wes Craven in particular had a fascination with the human mind and why people are the way they are, what makes them tick. And when you think about how empathetic you have to be to understand people enough to scare them effectively. And then he also was very conscious of the moment after the scare because that's how you keep people. It's easy to scare people. It's hard to make them like care. And so there was a lot of time and attention paid to the moments after the scares, which is what it makes it feel like an experience as opposed to just like shock after shock, blood and more blood. And I've found through working on this, through talking to people in the franchise and people outside of the franchise, horror people are like some of the nicest people I have ever met. And it makes sense because you have to have that empathy to scare people. You get all of your stuff out on the screen and they're just lovely. So it creates this really interesting dichotomy between the filmography and the personality that I love.
I love that perspective that horror fans are some of the nicest people. And I think it's so true because it's such an outlet for the things that we're most afraid of or our own inner darkness. And it's sort of just a place to put it for a few hours and then you can kind of get on with it. And it really seems like Wes Craven understood that and could channel that into his movies. And perhaps that's part of why he was able to be so lovely. And I mean, you talk about some of the more challenging aspects with the studio and these two executives who shall not be named. And it was just really nice to hear the beautiful contrast of the environment that Wes Craven created on set for the cast to improvise and play and just really bring their whole selves to the movie.
Yeah, there was a sense of mutual respect and both creating a safety net for people to try things and also actually listening and valuing input from other people, but not being like unnecessarily deferential. Like he wasn't the kind of guy to like take your idea to make you feel good if his idea was better. Best idea wins, regardless of who it comes from, kind of a situation.
Yeah, he seemed to really be able to strike a balance between being kind and respectful while being professional because he produced excellence, and that's sort of the job that you have to do. Of course, you have so many wonderful interviews about what Wes Craven was like in the book, and I wondered if that was challenging for you in terms of painting a picture of who this person was, because of course you did not get the opportunity to interview him because he has passed away. Was that challenging at all?
Oh, of course. I knew from the very beginning of working on this that I wanted to do a chapter of this book dedicated to him and his legacy. When I initially did an oral history of the first movie for the 25th anniversary for Hollywood Reporter, I ended up breaking it into two pieces because the way that people talked about Wes just like kind of blew me away. And so I decided that that deserved its own separate piece. And so back then I did, a smaller second piece looking at specifically all of these people who worked on only the first movie talking about Wes. So I knew he was going to be a big part of the story. And I knew I couldn't talk to him. So I I read as much as I could. I listened to interviews. I listened to all of the director's commentaries multiple times. And then I talked to the people closest to him. His wife, Ia, was lovely. And Kevin Williamson was very close to Wes. Marianne Madalena, his longtime producer, I talked to her for quite a bit. A lot of his crew who worked with him over and over again. And so I tried to tell his story through the people who knew him and worked with him. And I'm I'm happy with how it turned out. Obviously, like he's one of those people that like I wish I would have had a chance to talk to him when he was still with us. But that's not, you got to be realistic. I'm not like calling the medium from Bravo and asking him to help me interview Wes from Beyond the Grave. So
Can
I
you
did
imagine?
what I could.
That would have been a whole other book. So I know that you wrote this book over a period of several years. I think you said you did something like over 80 interviews. You're going through all these old newspaper articles, and you're really immersing yourself in the world of Scream, like Scream City. During that period, did things ever get either meta or sort of spooky for you? I'm thinking about this one picture you shared on your Instagram. I think your husband took of late at night. You're working, it's dark, you're reading all this spooky stuff about Scream. Did things ever kind of get spooky for you?
Oh God. I mean, I had recurring ghost face dreams for like a while. I've always had like very vivid nightmares my whole life. It's just how my brain works. But yeah, there were ghost face dreams for a while, and most of the book was written between like the hours of 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. with just like me upstairs with the dogs. And so there was a lot of like, did we lock the doors? Do I need to get up and go check and make sure the alarm is set and like that kind of stuff? But nothing like knock on wood, nothing that crazy.
I'm glad that none of your friends were calling you up knowing that you were in this world and being like, "Hello, Ashley." That would have probably put you over the
See,
edge.
I'm the friend who would do that. So I did ask Roger Jackson why like how he avoids like how do you resist just screwing with people? And he was like, it's not scary out of context. And I was like, fully disagree. Like,
Disagree.
if disagree. But yeah, it was, and so in that Zoom interview, he like said my name and he's like, oh, really, Ashley? And, like, I have the clip saved because it's just awesome. Even just thinking about it now makes like the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
You should make that your ringtone.
Oh my God.
What was your favorite thing that you learned about Scream when you were researching this book? I think my favorite was certainly learning that David Arquette is a certified Bob Ross painting instructor. So I would love to hear your favorite thing that you learned.
There were so many. Um, Jack Quaid's playlist that he made to get into character for Scream is very, very fun. And like some of it makes sense. Like there are some songs from the soundtrack and Red Right Hand by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, but then like Tiny Dancer by Elton John is on this playlist for some reason, and Monster Mash. So that was really funny. Learning about the ghost face fetishes was something I was not anticipating. That's in the book.
Yeah, I
The
didn't know about that either. I don't know
it's
if I
a
wanted
whole
to.
thing. It's a whole thing. Um, the prank they played on the set of Music of the Heart that Meryl Streep was in on is one of my favorite stories. The just sort of like little moments between the cast and crew, like hanging out on set. One of the things that I find myself thinking about most often was something that Sheila Waldron told me about filming the opening of Scream 3, which is Cotton Weary's girlfriend is at home alone and she gets attacked by Ghostface. And she was recalling this conversation with Wes Craven and his wisdom that there's nothing scarier than a dolly into a closed door. So a shot where the camera is moving toward a door and you don't know what is on the other side and like your imagination just goes there. It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Like your imagination goes to the scariest place possible. Whether
Yes.
what's actually on the other side of that door is the scariest thing you can imagine or not, we'll find out when we get there. But that moment where like the dolly is pushing in on the door, I thought that was just so simple and yet so brilliant. And so that's one of the things that I find myself like just thinking about from time to time.
It's that tension release that you feel in horror and sort of playing with that. And again, you talk a lot about how Wes Craven was really interested in human psychology and portraying catharsis through his films. What is your sense of how he was able to do that in Scream?
Scream doesn't exactly have a happy ending, right?
Mm, mhm.
A lot of her friends are dead, her boyfriend did it. Um, but Sydney does survive. And so there's a sense that everything she's gone through, she came through at the end. And so being able to make that feel valuable, right? Like you care that she lives. And he built that, right? Like the story is amazing. Like this movie would not be what it is without that script. But the way that Wes Craven brought that first movie, especially to life, like you really care what happens to these people. And at the end of it, it there is like a bittersweet sense of relief and like a sense of like, oh well, if Sidney Prescott can get through this, then I can get through my Monday.
Absolutely. Even though the term final girl was coined before Scream came out, I think Sidney Prescott came at a really important time for girls, teenagers, young women in particular. I mean, I think 1996 was literally when the Spice Girls came out. So this was girl power time. And I think you're so right in talking about catharsis and how it sort of channeled through Sydney and that final girl archetype of being able to survive, to tell the tale, to defeat the bad guy. And I think it really opened up horror to a whole new demographic of people to be able to enjoy it coming from the 80s, which to me felt like it was maybe more for men. And do you have a sense, expanding the demographic for horror, was that an intentional choice by Wes Craven or Kevin Williamson?
I don't think it was intentional in that, we need to make something that women are going to enjoy as much as men. I do think that's just inherent in both of their personalities, right? Like they're just, I obviously didn't know Wes. I've talked to Kevin a lot over the last couple of years, and he's a wonderful human being. And they're just inclusive by nature. They're not gonna tell a story that is only going to appeal to like a sliver of the population because that's just like not how their brains work. And
Hmm.
when you have that level of compassion and empathy and creativity and intelligence, I think you just end up with better stories naturally. And those stories just have broader appeal.
Absolutely. And you talk about that in how Scream has evolved, in particular, five and six, we're seeing more diverse people in the movies. We're seeing more people from different backgrounds. We're seeing queer characters. And we're all so looking forward to Scream 7. It makes me think about this other brilliant quote from Roger Jackson in the book. He seems like he's an oracle. He said, "Going to a theater to see a film is the closest thing we have to collective dreaming." So, what do you think the return of legacy characters like Sydney, like Stu, says about our current collective unconscious or our current zeitgeist, that it seems like we really need them again at this point?
I think that we were overdue for a Sydney story. There hadn't been like a true Sydney story since Scream 2, really. She was central to 3 and 4 and part of 5, but those movies weren't about her life. They were about things that were going around her that involved Ghostface. Yes, Scream 4 was, spoiler alert, her cousin, but so much of that movie was centered on Jill's life and Jill's friendships. You see Sydney in her professional capacity in Scream 4, but you don't really know anything about what is going on in her personal life at all. And so to come full circle and go back to the origin of this and to tell a story about the original protagonist, I think is a return to grounding, right? Like her life and her reactions to these things and her as a character, right? Because she's pretty, she's smart, she's funny, but she's not like an Olympic athlete or the most popular girl in school or like some she's a very real person. And I
Hmm.
think that that was part of the reason why she resonated so well with teenage girls back in the 90s. And as a woman, she resonates with women because she's just a survivor. And I think that when we're in a time where like tent poles keep getting bigger and bigger and crazier, there is something beautifully simple about a grounded story. And when you're on the seventh movie in a franchise, I don't really know how you do that better than by returning to your roots, in a sense.
Hmm. All I can say is that I hope Sydney is relaxed. I hope she is thriving. I hope she is having a mimosa. She really has just been through so much.
She has.
Poor
Love
Sydney.
her.
Love her. How would you summarize the impact that Scream has had on horror and on you?
I think that one of the big things that Scream did was give horror movies permission to be horror and a whodunit, horror and comedy, horror and something that makes you think, feel, instead of the expectation that you're going to go sit and just be terrified for 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it is. And I think that that added a layer of depth to these movies that make them more enjoyable and more rewatchable. And it also let other filmmakers think outside the box. There are so many movies. So Guy Busick, who co-wrote 5 and 6 and wrote Scream 7, and then Radio Silence, who directed Scream 5 and 6, they did Ready or Not a few years before they got the Scream job, and that movie is so fun.
So fun. I
And
love.
and it's wild. But like maybe another movie at some point would have taken a swing in the way that Scream did, and we still would have ended up with movies like that. But absent something filling that void and giving people the push to, go do horror, and I don't know that a movie like that ever gets greenlit. So that's just one example. And there are many, many others. Like most of my favorite horror movies are funny, or like Sinners. I'm not even sure Sinners is a horror movie. That's like a period drama musical with vampires in it. Like that movie is so complicated and so beautiful and so excellent. And so the fact that like movies in or adjacent to the horror genre are capable of being so whatever they want, I think is one of the biggest impacts. It's not only Scream that did it, but Scream was a keystone moment.
That is such a beautiful testimony to Scream, that Scream is horror and it gave permission to so many other movies to be that way. And it just makes me think about my work as a therapist. We're so often holding this and this. We're not all one thing, and being able to be more than one thing, or this and really does speak to that catharsis piece that was so important to Wes Craven, and I think is why Scream holds such a special place in our hearts. Ashley, as we're nearing the end of our interview, I want to thank you so much for being here, and I want to ask you one final question. In writing this book about the Scream franchise, you're now basically part of the Scream metaverse. Have you considered the fact that you're basically Gale Weathers?
First of all, that's a huge compliment. I love Gail. I try to channel that every once in a while. I definitely did at one point send somebody the the gif of her at the computer trying to write her book, and she literally types like I don't know what the fuck to write. Like I said that to somebody. I have been saying, "Are you familiar with the phrase I wrote the book on this?" Like not earnestly, but like funny. No, that makes me honestly I'm Gale Weather. Like, yeah, I'm down.
You're
I'm
Gale
totally.
Weathers.
I love that comparison. I will fully embrace it.
You're Gale Weathers. You wrote the book on Scream, and everybody needs to read it. Do you want to talk a little bit about who narrates the audiobook?
Oh, a lovely fellow by the name of Roger L. Jackson, also known as the voice of Ghostface. I am still like just over the moon that he said yes to this. I didn't have any other ideas. I was just like, I want Roger to do this. And Roger said, yes, thank you, Roger. And he does such a great job. He's such a talented voice actor. And so I'll give you a little um, teaser. So most of the book is his voice. just like his regular voice, but there are some Ghostface quotes. And then he does the chapter titles in the voice, which I wasn't expecting. And when I tell you, I just squealed when I heard it because some of the titles are normal and then some of the titles are ham sandwich. So, like, if you ever wondered what it's like to hear Ghostface say ham sandwich, listen to the audiobook. It's incredible.
I've already read the book, but I'm definitely going to listen to the audiobook. Thank you so much, Ashley, for writing this incredible book. Such a love letter to Scream fans. And please let everyone know where and when we can find your book and where we can read more of your entertainment journalism online.
It's out on the 19th, which is tomorrow from when we're recording this. I do have a website. It is like sad and just getting started, so please don't judge me. I've been working on just a few other things, mostly on Instagram. Ashley Cullins on Instagram. I do have other social platforms. I'm trying to learn how to use TikTok. I'm not cool enough for TikTok.
Neither am I.
The book is everywhere, so buy it where you like to buy books.